So, recently a YouTuber who goes by the name of DistroTube made a video taking a first look at instantOS. And DistroTube, I don't know if you're watching this, but first off, thank you for not putting instantOS as a piece of in the thumbnail, because that would certainly describe your experience so far with it. So, I went through the video and fixed or addressed every single issue that arose in it. First off, the elephant in the room, performance. It ran horribly on his VM. Animations took forever. Key presses were delayed or not registered at all. The comments were as expected. instantOS, instant regret. I should have anticipated that when naming it. Here is instantOS running in VirtualBox in a first-gen Ryzen processor with 1GB of RAM and no GPU pass-through. Quite a difference, right? And there is a simple reason for that. Missing graphics drivers. DistroTube is using Word Manager, which is a graphical interface for QEMU instead of VirtualBox. And QEMU needs special graphics drivers for Xorg to work. Without them, Xorg freezes for half of the time, which leads to a massive decrease in frame rate and keystrokes being registered delayed or not at all. The window manager as well as the terminal extensively use Xorg for font rendering, which also leads to the odd sizes and misplaced fonts. I went through DistroTube's VM setup video and set up Word Manager exactly the way he has. And voila, it runs awful. Add the drivers to the installer, problem solved. But although performance was way better with drivers installed, it didn't even match that of a Raspberry Pi, which consistently pulls 60 frames per second. The interesting part is that this extends to other distributions as well. I tested Manjaro Mate on VirtualBox and Word Manager, and it runs pretty smooth on VirtualBox and consistent but a little sluggish on QEMU. But how can that be if QEMU is supposed to be so much faster than VirtualBox? There is also a simple reason for that. QEMU is not meant for desktop use. It's extremely mature and fast, but its graphical features are really bad. I mean, why do you think it doesn't have an official GUI and we have to rely on third-party tools like Word Manager to use it on a desktop? For example, there's no direct connection between the host and the virtual machine. It runs on a SPICE server, which is basically VNC or SSH X forwarding. And all graphics solutions for QEMU are either work in progress or specifically said to be very slow, or made by VMware and the first two. To top it off, there are some catastrophic bugs on QEMU and AMD Ryzen. Changing the resolution of the VM causes a massive memory leak in Xorg, which instantly fills up all the VRAM with just garbage, and slows down things even more. Members of the instantOS Discord, discord.io/instantOS, who were using Intel systems and Word Manager didn't report this bug, so it seems to be limited to AMD Ryzen. So I fixed the driver issue, and although instantOS runs fine on QEMU now, I'm asking you not to judge desktop distros based on the impression they give in an environment as unreliable and buggy as desktop QEMU and AMD Ryzen. He briefly goes over the source code of instantWM, the window manager in instantOS, and makes it seem like I was trying to hide the fact that it's a DWM fork. First off, I didn't just take DWM and spam it with pre-made patches. Over 60% of the source code is original, so it really is more instantWM than DWM, if you will. Ubuntu Mate doesn't have any mentions of GNOME, although Mate is a GNOME 2 fork. And Raspbian's Pixel desktop is literally just LXDE with dot files, and LXDE only gets mentioned in a blog post. Long story short, there's lots of examples of people doing that, except instantOS is not doing that. The About page of the website is one click away from the home page and clearly states that multiple instantOS programs are forks of Sugless tools. instantWM at this point didn't really have a README at all, and I don't consider the fact that it's a DWM fork important enough for it to be the only item in the README. I expanded the README a bit and explained the relation between instantWM and DWM. By the way, if I wanted to claim all of this as my own work, I would have removed comments mentioning DWM.
I didn't run through the installation on camera because the installation is a net install, which means it takes a long time because every package that it's installing, it has to pull down from the internet. It probably took a good 45 minutes to an hour for me to actually install instantOS in a VM, but I got it installed. The installer was basically a terminal script, so a command line script that just starts executing and pulling things down from the internet. Every now and then a Rofi menu would pop up to ask you to input things. Rather than inputting it directly into the terminal, you would input like username and password in this Rofi menu, or your locale, and basic things like that. The installer was pretty straightforward though.
Next up is the installation process. It's not Rofi, it's InstantMenu, a D-menu fork. But that's not the point. The installer is supposed to ask all things that require user input first and then start the installation. So if they just pop up every now and then, it's probably the missing graphics drivers affecting the startup times of the menu. It took pretty long for him. 45 minutes is not good, even for a net install. I fixed this by adding a mirror selection to the installer and using the Arch ranking score for mirrors. This got the installation time down to about 11 minutes on Word Manager with German internet, which is just really bad. There actually is a CLI version of the installer. It can run off any recent Arch ISO and can be used with this one-liner.
Just taking a look at the desktop here, it's a lovely wallpaper here, and it's got the instantOS logo here in the center, but I don't know why I have these two. I'm assuming they're conkeys.
The two conkeys. He changed the resolution without restarting, which leaves a trace of where conky used to be until it's overdrawn. Relogging or rebooting fixes it. Now the feedback on the conky is actually useful. I'll add the fact that the keyboard hint is just a constantly changing quick tip, and maybe add a date to it. Although I'm not a huge fan of these really elaborate conky setups, so I won't go overboard with it. I also added a VM detector that offers to fix the resolution for you and avoids the conky bug. It works on VirtualBox and QEMU.
I don't know why they're doing this. Get rid of the animations, some of the other stuff that's probably given us some problems.
Whew, the animations. He says that a lot of tiling WM users dislike animations, and his Xarc being broken really makes them a chore to sit through. They are completely optional though. You can toggle them on or off using Super Alt Shift S. I also added in a GUI toggle. I have them enabled by default because the type of person that doesn't change the default is also the type of person who would want animations. Plus, if they run properly, they can actually help provide visual clarity and look pretty cool.
So let me open up a terminal. Well, just holding the super key, that's what's bringing up that menu. If I hold the super key, or just tap it one time, I'm not exactly sure what the hell is bringing up the menu, but if I super space, I get Rofi opening, and that took forever for Rofi to open there.
About that applications menu, clicking on the desktop or pressing space with no application in focus opens it up. But because his Xarc is really laggy, it takes a few seconds, so it's unclear to him what exactly triggered it.
Don't install tmux and have it set to open by default in the terminal. That's a bad decision, and InstantOS developers, if you're listening,
hello,
you probably want to change that, because I don't think that's a smart decision, having tmux automatically run.
There is a few reasons tmux is running by default. First off is scrolling. You don't need a terminal patch to do that. Handled by tmux and handled much better than most terminal emulators do. Resizing. Without tmux, if you resize a window so it cuts off characters, they're gone. Accidentally switch layout, you're it's all gone. Open a new window, whoopsie, have fun deciphering that. That's one reason. The other one is the terminal emulators that are not related to conventional desktop environments close without complaint and take everything they run with them. You could be running anything, no matter how important. If you close the window, it's gone. tmux keeps your session open when closing the terminal emulator, so you can reconnect to it later. And again, if you don't want to use tmux, you cannot do so, but there are many people who don't know about tmux and won't bother to find out what it is and would still benefit from the mentioned problems being solved for them. Next thing, the terminal. He mistook it for URXVT when it's actually ST.
Copy that, and then I'm going to get back here in Vim, and let's see if we can actually paste that. It doesn't look like we have copy paste working here in our terminal. We don't have copy paste working in Vim.
Copy paste is working. At the time it was bound to Alt plus C or V. It's not that obvious, so I changed it to Ctrl Shift C/V. He also tries to configure URXVT for a large part of the video and fails to do so because it is not URXVT. ST is laggy and slow for him because it gets affected by the missing drivers. It uses libxft for font rendering, which totally gets screwed over by the broken graphics.
When I do super plus, nothing happens. When super minus or control minus is what we...
ST is pre-configured to have zooming, but the bindings weren't that obvious. They're now Ctrl plus minus. C is a compiled language, so including a config.dev.h file somewhere on the drive wouldn't actually do anything because you'd have to recompile anyway. But on that note, I plan on introducing a .dot file to configure instantWM and maybe automatically recompile it.
Install some software. First of all, let's install a better terminal emulator. One that is pre-configured with a lot of useful key bindings like the ability to zoom in and out and all of that. Let's just install Alacrity. Why are we using URXVT? If you're going to set URXVT as the default terminal, at least configure the damn thing. So I'm going to install Alacrity. We need a wallpaper changer. Again, GTK. Might as well install a GTK app like Nitrogen. Very easy and simple to use. Let's go ahead and install a GTK file manager that's not Nautilus. So PCman FM. And let me just hit enter on that. Let's just go with that because I think that will make our lives so much better.
Okay, so for the last point, some improvement suggestions. Alacrity as a terminal emulator. It definitely looks nice, but unless your computer is from the 90s, the impact of GPU acceleration is really not that noticeable. What is noticeable though is the higher startup time and the artifacts when resizing and transforming the window. They're small things really. It is a fine terminal emulator, but so is ST, so that's what instantOS will stick to. As for Nautilus, I know you hate GNOME and I don't like it either. But if you want a lightweight file manager, there's Ranger. It's also pre-installed and pre-configured with bindings, and it's actually pretty good. But why Nautilus? The search function. It's hands down the best of any file manager I've ever tried on any operating system. If you start typing, it shows files with that name. Fuzzy matching, but prefers direct matches over fuzzy matches. It prioritizes search results that are from closer directories over search results that are basically 10 directories into the cache directory. Other file managers often show me a log file, 10 directories into the .config folder, when what I actually wanted is just a file in my downloads folder. Nautilus doesn't do that. It's not ideal, but it's what most people use, and if someone can show me a file manager or a function, add-on, whatever, in a file manager other than Nautilus that matches the search function in any way, I may consider switching. InstantOS has a wallpaper scraper to achieve an effect like seen on Chromecasts or Chromebooks, where the wallpaper changes to random wallpapers from the internet. I think that's better than including gigabytes of wallpapers, of which one, or in most cases none, are used. Plus, it's kinda cool generating a new wallpaper and seeing the results. But the wallpaper settings now prefetch a selection of wallpapers if you actually want them to. To wrap that up, the video is not meant to bash, or Z-shell, on DistroTube and go like, ooh, you're too dumb to set up a VM. If you're not using floating windows or animations, it really isn't obvious that like only every third frame is actually showing. I still suggest not using QEMU for desktop use, at least until the AMD Xorg memory leak is fixed. Again, I'm not trying to start any drama here, but I feel like if this is the very first introduction of instantOS to a wider audience, it should be a fair one. Bye!